really appreciated all the comments on both sides. It There's nothing better than getting input from residents and hearing the diversity of voices, because that's what makes our city great, the diversity of voices, the diversity of people. Um, as an elected official or as elected officials, we were voted in order to make the hard and difficult decisions. And we know everyone is not always going to be happy. Everyone is not always going to get what they want. But I would hope that after deliberating, listening to all the public comments, that we would be trusted to make the decision what's in the best interest of all. I just wanted to say that we have an obligation as council members to protect and serve, and we don't just protect and serve the statue. We don't just protect and serve, but we also want to protect the statue, and we serve those who want the statue to remain intact. But we also must protect those voices who have been silenced and marginalized. And one of the residents today said something really impactful. And another person asked a really good question: what would Junipero Serra do? And I've heard that on one side that Junipero Serra is this man who was benevolent and believed in God and wanted the best. And the question keeps coming up for me: what would he want for the city of Ventura today? Because as was mentioned, today is different than yesteryear. And I'm going to use the words of one of the speakers tonight who quoted him that said, "Always forward, never back." So if we're moving forward and we recognize that the statue is a piece of art and should be displayed and viewed by those who appreciate it, that today this conversation or this deliberation is about placement. Are we going to move the statue to the mission? Are we going to move it into storage? Are we not going to move it at all? That's what we're talking about, placement. And there is a few facts that we all agree on. The Chumash people in California preceded the mission. Another fact we all agree on: the mission is still here, it still stands. Another fact that we all agree on: the city of Ventura does acknowledge all history, and we want to continue to do so. And one last thing I want to say is we've heard a lot and we've listened a lot. There is a difference between written history and archaeological history. And I think that's kind of what this push and pull has been in all the conversations tonight. One is on paper, it's captured in language and in print by people. The other is buried and covered in dust and debris, encapsulated in time. And it has to be dug up and excavated. And the city of Ventura did pay to have a lot of archaeological sites excavated that had Chumash history. And I think it's going to be important, increasingly important as we move forward as a city, is making sure that the Chumash history is more acknowledged. But that's not necessarily the purpose and the reason why we're here today. Again, it's placement of a statue. And now that we've voted, that we've deemed the statue not historical, I want to, as I said earlier, be able to move forward. And I do not suggest that we I don't think it's in the best interest of our taxpayers to go to the ballot. I just want to speak to that briefly. I believe in this economic time, because of COVID and the pandemic, it would be a misuse of city funds in order to go to the ballot. And in addition, it's too late. So those are my comments, and I'll allow my colleagues to make their final comments as well.
Thank you, Councilmember Brown. Do we have additional comments from our colleagues? Councilmember Nasarenko?
Thank you very much. Before I comment, Deputy Mayor, do we need to address the CEQA issue before we move forward? That is, whether or not we believe because of its non-historical status, it's exempt?
Yes, Madam Deputy Mayor and Councilmember Nasarenko, before you can take action on the merits, you need to take action on CEQA.
I'd be happy to do so, Mr. Diaz. I'll move staff recommendation 12B to determine that CEQA does not apply and that it will not have a significant impact on the environment.
I second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
Now is the time for City Council to vote on staff recommendation B related to CEQA. Councilmember Nasarenko,
Yes.
Councilmember Brown,
Yes.
Councilmember Friedman,
Yes.
Councilmember Weir, Councilmember Weir. Yes. Councilmember Heitmann,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Rubalcaba,
Yes.
Mayor Rivera is absent. That motion carries. 6 yeses with 1 absent.
Councilmember Nasarenko and then Councilmember Heitmann.
Cheryl, go right ahead. I think I may have preempted you. Go right ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to clear up the question of voting because we heard from a lot of people they would like to see us put it to a public vote. And I think I'm correct in saying that we've missed that deadline. Is that correct? From whoever can answer that?
Councilmember Heitmann, yes, the deadline for resolutions to the county elections office is due July 1st. And based on the question that was raised last week, I did contact the elections office and ask them directly, would they consider, for the July 1st deadline, that was for the November vote, to be very clear. We could do a special election and that would cost roughly in the order of magnitude about $250,000. And when that election would occur would be determined by the council. There was a second comment made though that the city attorney mentioned last week as well that Ventura County has an early deadline for resolutions and that the deadline for true an application being filed with the county is sometime in early August. And the county elections office did indicate that they would be required to accept a resolution. However, there would be no opportunity for any kind of arguments for or against to be filed with the ballot. So it would be a statement standing alone with no arguments for or against. And while the county clerk is not an attorney, he did say it would likely expose you to legal potential legal problems.
Great. Thank you for that clarification. I just to let people know that that's the status of it, and I certainly would not be in favor of that. I don't think it's warranted. I think we are elected to do make these kind of decisions, and they're hard decisions. And I certainly wouldn't want to spend that kind of money at this point of what we're going through budget-wise. But that was my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Heitmann. Councilmember Nasarenko, followed by Councilmember Weir.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. And I too want to thank all the individuals who have emailed us, spoken at now 3 meetings. Let me go ahead and explain to you how I looked at this issue and ultimately where I arrived after doing so. My first question that I had to ask myself was, who is Father Serra? And the result of that inquiry would help me understand whether or not he is the best representation, the best symbol for the city of Ventura in the year 2020. So with respect to the first question, I had to do some historical research. And about 7 years ago in 2013, my family and I were at the Huntington Museum, Library and Garden in San Marino. And lo and behold, there was an international exhibit on Junipero Serra. It dealt primarily, as the Huntington always does, with primary manuscripts, documents, sources. Their allegiance to history is very strong. And it made somewhat of an impression on me, but nonetheless, I I moved forward, and at this juncture said to myself, I'm going to go back, figure out who co-curated that exhibit, and use it as my basis for understanding who Junipero Serra was. So I found the UCR history professor who was a co-curator. I read his book, and I learned the following. This was a man who came from an impoverished town on the island of Majorca. That's halfway, I didn't even know where, between Algiers and Barcelona. He grew up in poverty. He had a very remarkable childhood and youth. He became a theologian. He studied at the convento. He became a professor at the university. He also became a deeply devout and pious Franciscan. And as all Franciscans are trained to do, by vocation, by being Franciscan, he sought out to evangelize, to spread the gospel to souls who did not have an opportunity to hear it, or who may have been wayward or lost. He made that his life mission. And he did so with incredible devotion to Catholicism. As one speaker mentioned, this is an individual who would self-mortify and self-flagellate for the reason that he wanted to come closer to the passion of Christ and the experience of the Savior on the cross. And in his 30s, when he finally traveled to what was New Spain, he set out with this goal in mind, and this is a direct quote from that co-curator's book, to go where no Christian foot had trod before, and to set out, as he very deeply understood was needed, to be an apostolic missionary, to really carry the faith to new lands and to new people. So when he lands in Mexico City and then moves on to a northern missionary in Sierra Gorda, and then thereafter to Baja California, he encounters Native Americans who we also refer to as Indians. And it's clear to me that in those encounters, he sought to do what he felt a Franciscan should perform, and that is convert and help them save their souls. He did indeed, according to the resources, consider them to be somewhat uncivilized. He found them to have pagan instincts, that they needed to be brought into the Spirit. They needed to be baptized. They needed to undergo the catechism and undergo confessional. Very understandable in the 1750s and 60s. Now, fast forward, he moves on to the California missions after going through the Baja missions. And what I learned is that by the time he reaches ours, Mission San Buenaventura in 1782, he's actually at the twilight of his life. He was to die 2 years later in 1784. So really, Mission San Buenaventura, when Father Serra starts it, is almost at its infancy. It would grow in terms of the number of Indians there, and then ultimately it would fall dramatically, catastrophically. And that is what I want to address now, because I think when we look at Father Serra, we ask ourselves, is he a pioneer? Is he a religious icon? Do we look at him through sort of his belief in the universality of Catholicism? How do we assess this man? Obviously, we see him in Ventura as a cherished figure, as a father figure, someone that's beloved, someone who brings us solace and comfort. And we have to look at all of the above. I mean, it's clear to me that this is a multifaceted, complex, and complicated individual who is deeply spiritual, very smart, and a sage administrator. But when he moved forward with his goal to evangelize and to save souls, it came at an enormous cost to the indigenous population. And what do I mean by that? When he came to the missions, the idea was to bring the Indians into the mission. And it is in that setting that they could find God. They could undergo the confessional, baptism. They would receive the sacraments. He felt that when they were in the wild, nomadic, they could not be saved, that they needed to come in, be clothed, and undergo a conversion. But in that process, the Spanish and the missionaries unwittingly brought disease. And it's also true that they brought non-native plants They brought non-native livestock, and those non-native plants and non-native livestock destroyed the villages of the Chumash, which were very rich at the time. I mean, the Chumash, a very sophisticated culture, 80 to 100 languages, organized in villages with very distinct music, art, clothing, and religious beliefs. But to Father Serra, in the context of the times, he felt that that needed to be converted and replaced with his Franciscan belief in Catholicism. So in doing so, what happens? You had Indians die of disease. You also had their livestock, that is what they hunted, and their plants decimated, which brought them into the mission because there was nowhere else to eat or to find food, and thus exacerbating their potential to be exposed to and die from disease. The question of whether or not this was somebody who was genocidal, who murdered, who raped, I found no evidence of that. I agree with some of the comments in that regard. However, and that's a big however, what he set in motion, cultural appropriation of the Indian culture, the subjugation of them into the mission led to the demise and decimation of those who lived here for thousands of years. So why do I mention all this? I'm not here to go ahead and give a history lesson, but I just wanted to explain to folks, how did I arrive at my ultimate conclusion? Well, I had to look at who Father Serra was. And I, again, as I mentioned, find him to be somebody devout and pious, but who also set in motion something that was just irreversible. It caused tremendous harm, and I believe unwittingly on his part, to those people who were here, and that's namely the Chumash and the Indians. So where do I arrive at now? I arrive at my final destination, which is what do we do with the statue? And I come to the conclusion that we need to preserve it. We need to make sure that this monument remains, but that it not remain on city land. It needs to be housed somewhere that is more appropriate than a city municipal park, which is where it is right now, and somewhere that people look to as a symbol of Ventura. Because when I look at Ventura in 2020, it's so different from the Ventura of 1936 or the Ventura of 1989. I think we are more pluralistic. I think we're more diverse. I think we're more embracing of different faiths and cultures. And not that Father Serra is incongruous to that, but we have to ask ourselves, is there a symbol perhaps that's more appropriate to envelop and take into account those attributes that I just mentioned? And should Father Serra be somewhere as a religious figure, given his religious iconic saint status, should he be placed in a religious institution? And I believe he should, and the institution most appropriate would be the mission. And why do I say that? 1985, Pope John II gives Father Serra the status of veneration. As many of us know, 3 years later, in 1988, he is indeed he is someone who undergoes beatification. And then in 2015, he is canonized. He becomes a saint. That needs to be preserved and held on mission grounds, on religious property, but not on city property. And my motion would be that we relocate safely, peacefully, respectfully the Father Serra statue to the mission grounds. And we understand that in doing so, we are recognizing both the attributes of Serra that are positive, as well as those that unleashed the devastation of a culture and a people. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Nasarenko. Councilmember Weir? Councilmember Weir, you're...
Okay, is my mic working better now?
You need to really shout in your mic.
Okay, this is, I'm sorry. I, as a child, was taught to admire Serra, and it's been an interesting journey, I would say, to listen to our Chumash brothers and sisters, and our residents in our city. And here, oh, sorry. The stories that they tell and the feelings that they have about this. And I did a lot of research as well. And I have to say that most history is a little bit complicated, and there's always alternate stories. And I want to read you something about Father Serra that I found out. This is from the California Mission Foundation website, which is, I believe, an informational website about the missions. And this is about how Ventura came to be as a mission city. There were 3 missions had formed to the north, and there were 3 missions that had been created in the south. And Ventura was sort of in the middle. And it says here, the fathers, who already had 3 missions in the north and 3 in the southern part of California, feared an Indian revolt in the state's midsection. They thought an Indian revolt could be devastating because of the area's terrain. The missionaries feared that the angry Indians could easily divide the state. Now, I had never heard that particular motivation for, and they go on to talk about the Santa Barbara mission, La Purísima, Ventura, and then the military outpost in Santa Barbara. And what I find interesting about this discussion is that statues tell stories about people like Father Serra, but even more than the stories, they reflect our values. And they do teach history, but that's pretty shallow. You know, we have a lot of opinions about Serra, and the depth of the history we know about Serra is not from looking at his statue. And we've heard tons of different interpretations as to his role in our history. And as we move forward here, I think this conversation is important, but the part of the conversation that we need to get better at is, what about the 12,000 years before Serra? We have a Chumash history that is way deeper and longer than our mission history. And I've seen communities change their statues and change their symbols as time goes on. And I think we're at a point right now here when we're considering that. And it's healthy. It's healthy to take a look at these things. But it's healthy to do it with deliberation. And that's what we're doing here. We're deliberating, which takes longer instead of vandalism. But deliberation is more thoughtful and it's more durable over time. And even if we personally do not find a monument objectionable, our respect for our neighbors and the original inhabitants, which here were the Chumash, should compel us to listen to those who do. And that's what I've been doing, is listening, trying to listen to everybody. And the conclusion I have come to through all this listening is that as the city council representing this community, we need to make the decision. We need to take the responsibility. And our ultimate goal, I think we have 3 ultimate goals here, and they all have to do with honor and dignity. First of all, we need to honor the Chumash, whose home this has been for 12,000 years, by determining a more fitting place for the statue. We need to honor the Catholics and others who revere Serra by caring for his statue in a location where his significance will be 100% celebrated. And we need to honor the craftspeople and artists who created this work of art by acknowledging their talents and contributions as well. And we do need to store it to protect it as we determine the best home for it. The best option is the mission, since Serra's role in Ventura history was the founding of the mission, which is now Basilica San Buenaventura. This morning, we heard the news that our mission was designated by the Pope as a basilica. And I think this community, regardless of the history of the formation of the mission, embodies today something we can all be proud of. The mission embodies ministry and service to our community, and now even more, the statue of Serra is very fitting in that location where it can be safe and where it can be revered. And I want to say a special thank you to Father Tom, who has represented his congregation with honor and dignity and intelligence, and for Julie Tumamaya, who is the Chumash elder that we have listened to over and over again with her dignity and her wisdom. And these are the people that we need to work together with in the future. And I believe that our city can do a better job of celebrating our Chumash heritage. And I have quite a few ideas of how we can do that. But at the current time, this statue needs to be protected. It needs to be moved in order to protect it. And we need to find a home for it that is the most appropriate place for this particular Father Serra person. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Weir.